Welcome to the interesting documentary YouTube channel. We invite you to join us and learn about one of the most fateful and most shocking events in 20th century history, the attack on Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941 is forever etched into US history as a date which will live in infamy. And this day permanently changed the course of World War II. We'll delve into why this attack occurred and how it was planned and executed, and what its consequences were. Get ready, because we're travelling back in time for a closer look at this event. To understand the attack on Pearl Harbor, we need to go back a bit and look at the complex geopolitical conditions in the Pacific region. In the 1930s, Japan was rapidly modernizing and seeking to dominate East Asia. Its growing industry and military machine required vast natural resources, especially oil, which the country had very little of. This is why Japan began an aggressive expansionist policy, invading Manchuria in 1931 and later China in 1937. The United States, though initially seeking to maintain neutrality, grew increasingly concerned about Japan's aggression in China and Southeast Asia. When Japan invaded French Indochina in 1940, aiming to secure access to strategically important resources, the US responded. In July 1941, the US imposed a complete embargo on oil and other crucial raw materials to Japan, and also froze its assets in US banks. This was a huge blow to Japan's economy and military capabilities, as 80% of its oil imports came directly from the US. These sanctions created a critical situation in Japan. Its military reserves were rapidly dwindling, and Japanese leaders felt cornered. They knew that if the situation continued, their war machine would grind to a halt within a few months. Diplomatic negotiations between the US and Japan continued, but without significant results. The US demanded that Japan withdrew its forces from China and Indochina, but this was unacceptable to Japanese military leaders, who saw it as a loss of essential territories and influence. It was in this tense environment that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto of the Imperial Japanese Navy, though not entirely a proponent of war, understood that if war with the US was inevitable, Japan had to strike first and strike hard. He devised a daring plan aimed at paralyzing the US Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Yamamoto believed that a swift and decisive blow would give Japan enough time to consolidate its captured territories and possibly force the United States to negotiate a favorable peace. He understood that a prolonged war against the industrial might of the US would be disastrous for Japan. Japanese planning was exceptionally meticulous and secretive. Operation Z was kept under wraps, even from most high-ranking officers. On November 26, 1941, the Japanese attack force, led by Vice Admiral Choichi Nagumo, set sail from the Kuru Islands. It comprised 6 aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, along with cruisers, destroyers, and submarines. They sailed a northern route to avoid detection, maintaining strict radio silence throughout the journey. In the early hours of Sunday, December 7th, at approximately 7:48 AM local time, while many American sailors were still asleep or preparing for breakfast, the first wave of Japanese aircraft, consisting of 183 planes, took off from the aircraft carrier decks. This wave included Kate-type torpedo bombers, Val-type dive bombers, and Zero-type fighters. The primary target was Battleship Row, the location in Hawaii where 8 US warships were moored: the USS Arizona, Oklahoma, Nevada, California, West Virginia, Tennessee, Maryland, and USS Pennsylvania. Japanese torpedo bombers, specially modified to operate in the shallow waters of Pearl Harbor, launched torpedoes at the unexpected sides of the battleships. The USS Oklahoma quickly capsized after 9 torpedo hits, claiming the lives of 429 sailors. Dive bombers targeted the decks and ammunition magazines. The USS Arizona suffered a direct hit to its ammunition magazine from a large bomb, triggering a catastrophic explosion that split the ship in two and instantly killed 1,177 sailors. He sank within minutes. In addition to warships, airfields were also attacked to destroy US aircraft on the ground and prevent any aerial resistance. Hickam, Ford, and Ewerfield air bases suffered significant damage. 8:54 AM local time. The second wave, consisting of 167 aircraft, arrived approximately an hour later. Although some US troops had already recovered and began firing anti-aircraft weapons, the attack was still highly effective. The second wave focused more on ships and infrastructure that were not yet damaged. Even more bombs were dropped on ships, warehouses, and air bases. The USS Nevada, attempting to leave the harbour, was attacked and forced to run aground to avoid sinking in the channel. Although the attack was a surprise, some US soldiers showed heroism and resistance. For example, Sergeant Dory Miller, an African-American cook from the USS West Virginia, manned a machine gun and fired at Japanese planes, even though he was not trained to use the weapon. However, overall resistance was sporadic and insufficient to stop the attack. By approximately 10 AM, the attack ended. The Japanese planes returned to their aircraft carriers. Although a third wave of attack, targeting fuel tanks and ship repair facilities, was considered, Admiral Nagumo decided to withdraw, fearing heavy losses and believing his mission was already accomplished. The attack on Pearl Harbor had immense and lasting consequences, changing the course of world history. During the attack, 2,403 Americans were killed, including 68 civilians, and 1,177 were wounded. Japan suffered relatively minor losses: 29 aircraft, 5 mini-submarines, and 64 soldiers killed. The US Pacific Fleet suffered enormous losses. All 8 battleships were damaged, and 4 of them, the USS Arizona, Oklahoma, Utah, and USS Bismarck, a training ship, were completely written off. Also, 188 aircraft were destroyed or damaged. However, it is important to note that 3 US aircraft carriers, the USS Enterprise, Lexington, and USS Saratoga, were not in port during the attack, which proved to be a crucial factor in the future. Also, fuel tanks and repair facilities, vital for the fleet's operation, remained untouched. Although the attack was a tactical triumph for Japan, it became a strategic mistake. Yamamoto's hope that the attack would demotivate the US and force them to negotiate was misguided. On the contrary, the attack united the American nation like never before. The day after the attack on December 8, 1941, the US Congress almost unanimously declared war on Japan. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, in his address to Congress, famously called December 7th a date which will live in infamy. A few days later, on December 11th, Germany and Italy, Japan's Axis allies, declared war on the United States, thus formalizing the US entry into World War II. The attack sent a massive shockwave of anger and outrage throughout America. It completely shattered the country's isolationist sentiments and galvanized the public for the war effort. From that point on, the US began mobilizing its immense industrial and human potential, transforming itself into the arsenal of democracy. Unfortunately, one of the negative consequences was a rising wave of distrust and xenophobia against Japanese Americans. Although most of them were loyal US citizens, thousands were interned in camps on the West Coast, out of fear of espionage and sabotage. This remains a dark page in US history. The attack on Pearl Harbor directly led the US to undertake unprecedented military actions in the specific region. Following this attack, US military power grew exponentially, leading to decisive victories such as the Battle of Midway and ultimately Japan's surrender in 1945. The attack on Pearl Harbor is not just a historical event, but also a powerful lesson about the importance of diplomacy, intelligence, and military strategy. It is a day that reminds us of the horrors of war, sacrifice, and resilience. Today, the Pearl Harbor Memorial is a sacred place where visitors can honor those who died and reflect on the significance of this fateful day. Thank you for joining us for this interesting documentary. What battle should we talk about in the next video? Perhaps Midway or Vietnam? You can leave your opinion in the comments section. And now, until we meet again in another interesting documentary video.